Hello and welcome to episode 134 of Coach Quip. I'm Coach Chris.
I'm Coach Robyn, and today we're talking about
training journals.
Oh, this is getting to be a bigger one.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about writing down things a couple of times in the past. I don't know about you. I have a problem with journals.
What's your problem?
The problem is that I love them and I collect them and I have a lot of them. So this is a topic that I am very happy with.
Are they empty or full?
Some of them are full. Some of them are in process. A lot of them are empty because I find them and I get them. But I always have a use for them.
Well, and like you already have one ready to go.
Yeah.
I need some, so I'm going to come to your house.
You can have all my lined ones because I really like lined ones. I'll bring you some. Well, today we're talking about training journals and things, ways to use a training journal to actually help your training. So I think that, we talked recently about writing down your goals.
Like writing them down physically, not typing, physically writing them out.
Yeah, the power of writing down your goals, episode 122, if you want to go back and check that out. Because the truth is that people who write down their goals are exponentially more likely to accomplish them than people who don't write them down. And we know that there are several ways that people use training journals, or maybe don't even know that they're using a training journal, but they have the start of one.
Yeah.
So most of our athletes have a Strava, a Zwift, a Training Peaks account, some way that they're getting their training delivered to them and that they are logging their miles. And maybe that's just the account that's attached to your smartwatch or to your GPS watch. But you have some sort of data out there. But using that data in a way that has it in one place that you can refer back to can be super helpful for you accomplishing your goals.
And we're definitely not telling you to not use your Training Peaks. Mm-hmm. Listen, to all my athletes, I still want you to use them.
Yeah.
Use those platforms. This is going to be kind of in addition to that, or how to level that up.
Mm-hmm. So in this episode of Coach Quip, we're talking about training logs, how to use them, what to put in them, and how they can help you. So stick around.
First up, why? Why would we keep a training log, right? Basically, it's going to help you keep getting more from your workout. So it sounds silly, but like by reflecting on it and writing, we are able to process it better, and because that fitness actually starts to set in better, or maybe we learn something and can adjust it.
I think using a training journal there's this concept of a second brain. So there are these computer programs that people have where they store, their documents, their important things they want to download and keep track of things, basically journaling on your computer, right? Your second brain is just a place to stash all of the things that you are thinking about in one place. And this is why it's so cool to have a training journal where you can actually take that time to reflect on your training or on your racing and put it down in a notebook or in your Training Peaks notes, but we're advocating for writing down here. And you can refer back to that. So, the power of having all of that information in one place instead of trying to remember back like, oh, what day was it that it was really cold outside and what did I wear?
Right, not necessarily needing to breadcrumb everything's in one spot.
Exactly. Training journals can help provide clues, and that's the reason that we write all this down in one spot. So it's a way to connect the dots between different things that are happening. And we can see this when you look back and, both positive and negative, tracking the clues. There might be times where you can see patterns of an injury starting to happen, right? Or there might be signs of progress. You're feeling really great in specific workouts and you can look back on that. So having all of that information written down can give you a snapshot of the bigger picture and help you connect those dots.
And also help anticipate in future too. I know that, there are certain phases, especially in longer marathon plus type of training cycles where you are just so hungry, and the first time it kind of takes you by surprise. But if you would log and be able to kind of reread that before heading into a cycle, you're like, okay, back quarter of training, I can either eat more protein or I can be starving all the time, right?
Yep.
And then you anticipate it and you can, hopefully react a little bit better.
Yeah. And then the last thing, really great reason to use a training log is that it can really boost your confidence. I know this is something that you have your athletes do. It's written on all of our training plans is, 2 weeks out from the race or after your peak week to look back at what were your hardest workouts or what were your most challenging workouts that you accomplished, or just look back at the big picture of all of these weeks that you've stacked and stacked and stacked. And that can give us a lot of confidence going into our races.
I love that. All right, what to track? What the heck do we track in a log? I do think that some people struggle with this, especially. There are logs out there. Like I know Grayson Murphy has one. That's a great training journal that people really, really, buy in bulk, or at least it seems on Instagram and in my circles. And that is actually kind of feeding you some ideas of what to track. But a lot of times, if you just have those pretty line journals that Coach Chris is going to gift me, what do I put in there, right? So a lot of athletes, they're going to put in some type of training, like what actually happened, into the software program. So like something like Training Peaks, Final Surge, Zwift, or Strava. That's gonna help, right? That's gonna be kind of the bulk of it. Your basic training logs can also include things like distance and time, paces during the workout, especially if they were surprising, kind of on the top or the bottom end. If it was like, whoa, or if it was like, whoa, what is happening here? Those should go in there. Along with like any other additional info that can be helpful for tracking. I know that I just had a call this week with an athlete that really, there was a speed run that probably would have been done easier if it were with people, but this past Monday was some cataclysmic weather, so she did it kind of at a different time of day, did it solo, but then also had a really hard time with it. And when we broke it down, it's most likely because she is in the phase of her cycle that is going to leave her pretty zapped. So, had we not started writing that down into a notes form, we wouldn't have queued that up.
All right, so you're right. So a lot of the, if our watches are automatically uploading to whatever platform that we are tracking our training, we're automatically getting the time, the distance, and maybe heart rate even as well. And all of that is great to be able to look at. And a lot of those apps do the hard work for you of breaking down paces by mile or by segment if you're touching the buttons. So that info is already there, but there's so much more beyond that we can write down and keep track of that can be really, really helpful. So starting off with intensity, this can be for runners or doing strength training. So something like you can track the weights that you're lifting. It's great to see the progress. I used 25s in a class this week, but I used a 30 for a row in this class, and that was amazing. Like watching those sort of best stack up and seeing your progress there is great. And if it's something like a speed or a tempo workout, also making note of that, because you're going to have very different metrics on your easy AF days versus some of your quality workouts.
Other details on there about pacing too, like the actual split times. I know that, to your point, your Garmin, for instance, is going to usually split that out, especially if you're hitting a manual lap or if you've pre-programmed it. But I know that like our wind runners, a lot of times in the notes back to me, and honestly, I think sometimes they're more for themselves than anything else. They will actually write out in the comments what their splits were to make sure that, one, they were within range or not, and why would that be? Two, that they were progressive, because sometimes they go, especially when they're running together, they'll go out too fast. And it really helps. Sometimes I take it one step further and ask them to also put in their splits for their recovery bits. And they're probably like, "Whoa, what's the point? It's easy AF." And I'm like, well, if you're doing it too fast, we need to know. Or if we start to see you really nailing things because you did slow it down, then we're going to want to keep that.
That is a great example of the way that training logs can keep us accountable to really following the letter of the workout. I ask my athletes to write them down, and they're writing them in the comments of Training Peaks. Even though I can click in and see them, I do want them to take that moment to reflect, because there is something, and this is the reason that we're advocating for this, that there is something about taking the time to look at your workout, to think about your workout, and to sort of distill what went well, what went wrong, and what you can improve on. And we don't do that very often.
No.
Like we're just moving at such a fast pace.
It just goes green, done, we're done, yay, smiley face.
Yeah,
and
back to work.
The devil is in the details,
Absolutely, yeah. So I love that. We can also track milestones, and so this is a really great thing. So many of us are thinking about success just as race day, and we are always advocating on this show and in our coaching to think of the Nike term, measuring success in as many ways as possible. And so in your training log, you can track some of these milestones of maybe it's the longest long run that you've ever done. And it's not a race, but you are building, and that's something to be proud of. It can be personal bests within training, maybe leveling up your pace card based on a time trial or something like that.
Yeah, I love that.
So that's a great way to have that information there. And again, this is something that when we look back before race day, it gives us so much confidence to see, like I have been, progress isn't always linear, but I have been making progress over time in certain ways.
Other things that can go on there are the times of day that you're working out. Thinking about how that relates to how you dial in nutrition and hydration and any energy levels. So this is kind of two ways that I think of it. One is if you have a race that you're training that has a funky start time, like a New York City Marathon or a Boston, right? We will need to really honestly test ourselves out because those are some funky times. And so we need to dial those in order to be able to race effectively. Or if we're training for something that's really long or a stage race, I know I just trained Kristen Gonzalez who ran with Tortugas for the Speed Project. And so one of the things that we came up with is splitting her long runs. She was having a lot of troubles getting the runs done on the weekend. And so we were like, okay, let's do your long run on Thursdays and have like an AM and a PM session. Always having the AM session be harder from a intensity standpoint, and then have more like truly aerobic, easy miles in the evening. But it was the perfect training because when she went to run sleep deprived or, having been sedentary, in the van during the Speed Project for a few hours at a time, she was really able to kind of draw on that and realize, hey, you know what? I took a shot of espresso before this and it worked really, really well. It really, perked me up and it didn't mess up my stomach because she had tested it.
Yeah, I've been having a lot of conversations with my athletes about how the time of day that they work out relates to their nutrition and hydration.
Yeah.
And so that would be the next thing that you could track in your journal would be your general, both general and workout specific nutrition and hydration. And this is so important for the races that you just mentioned, or as an example, I'm coaching someone right now who recently left their full-time job and went to freelance work, has a much more flexible schedule, and also needs some sleep. So they've shifted their runs to be later mid-morning or early afternoon. And fueling-wise, that's a totally different ballgame than waking up, having food and coffee, and then going, versus you've already had time between your meal and your run, and you might even be bumping up against another meal. And so how does that play into your performance? So these are all great things to track, as well as specific quantity and timing of nutrition in your workouts, because part of the deal of training is training your gut as well if you have races. So we have to be marking that stuff down, and this is, I think, one of the best ways to dial it in, because you can constantly make tweaks and try different products and see what works for you.
I think this is such a huge one, and I'm going to give a little personal anecdote here, which is I love to know the things that work for me personally as an athlete when I am dragging ass. Now that I know we can cuss on this.
Yeah.
So we used to have an espresso machine here, and I would need to get a run in, and I would just be so tired. And not that I'm telling everybody to do this, because I'm not. But this is like a cycling trick. This is actually the 4 Bullet Friday that we're putting out for members. I think this is one of the ones for tomorrow. 20-30 minutes before doing a tempo run, I would take a shot of espresso. And let me tell you, the most amazing runs of all time. I would all of a sudden, it wouldn't like supercharge me, because I definitely drink coffee, but it would give me just enough of a lift. It wouldn't be so much volume that I would like have to go to the bathroom, right? But it would give me that edge and that pick me up, so much so that if I'm doing a long race, I will rely on that little bit of coffee. And I don't even know if it's working, but in my mind, it worked. All of those treadmill sessions, during the season. And so then I think it works. And so then guess what? It actually works. And that's like the coolest part, because it's like you learn a trick and then you use the trick. And then when you use it again, you just assume it's going to work because you tested it out.
It might actually be working, but the placebo effect is also so
who cares?
and this can be with anything, right? Like anything. Like I like 3 gummy bears before I go on my runs. Awesome. Like that's great.
It's a different type of priming. It's totally true.
Yep. Next up is you can track your heart rate. So that is something that maybe is already happening, but I think that's something that's really interesting over time, depending on the intensity of the workouts. I had an athlete who has just an extremely high heart rate, and we were trying to figure out, is it heat related? Is it tempo related? It just turns out that they just have a very high heart rate when they're running. And layering the heart rate numbers versus how they felt, so their own personal assessment of how difficult was that workout, has been really, really helpful to see, like, is this something that we actually should be concerned about, or is this your baseline? This is where you kind of always are.
A small asterisk on that one is heart rate variability. So you can absolutely journal about this one and log it, but just know that it is exactly that. It's variable.
Right.
And certain devices, like I tend to like how Aura tests it the best versus like some of the watch metrics. So just look for overall big trends. Don't completely freak out when you see crazy numbers. I don't think the technology is quite there when it comes to HRV.
So smart. And also, whatever you're using, if you're consistently using that, then you have that baseline.
Yeah.
So you can kind of judge it based on past performance. Like, if you're always high on the watch, maybe it's the watch, but at least you know when you're going up and down.
You're going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
On that note, which can absolutely impact our sleep hours and quantity of sleep, quantity of sleep, making sure that kind of over time you can say, I slept really well last night and I had a great run, or I slept terrible and my resting heart rate was up 5 beats during the day. So when I went to do my, intensity ride, it was just, there was nothing there. I think that really, really, really helps you put into perspective maybe what you can anticipate to get out of a workout so that you're not quite so reactive to.
Yeah, and especially for the folks who are so concerned about sleeping the night before a race, and we know that that's such poor sleep, to be able to see that you can perform on lower sleep, but maybe it's helpful if you had great sleep for 3 days and then one night of disrupted sleep and you're okay, like that can be a big confidence booster
absolutely.
too. Next up is weather conditions and gear. This is one of my favorite ones to have people track, because just as you have Henry the Heat Monster, we have people who suffer in all sorts of conditions. So some people really love running in the cold, some people hate it, some people like the heat, some people cannot tolerate it, and their performance declines because of it. You recently put out, I guess last summer, we had a little bit about how the heat actually impacts your running paces, which I think people don't really realize, but it's really important to track that weather, whether it's high humidity or it's raining or it's extremely hot or extremely cold. You can see how you perform over time with those conditions. And then also the part that I really like to layer on here is gear. And so particularly in the spring as the weather is changing, and I find like spring and fall are the hardest as we shift seasons and we're not sure what to wear.
Yeah, I have all my stuff hanging everywhere right now. It's like, what is it going to be?
Yeah, but I assume you know what to choose based on how it is outside, and that is something that's learned over time. Yeah. So you can get the greatest vest, you can get the best waterproof jacket, but how does that actually perform when it's 40 degrees versus 60 degrees? And that can make or break a training session. Like if you are roasting and sweating through all of your clothes on a 40-degree day, you're not going to have your best performance.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm putting an asterisk on this weather one too. Yeah. I really love journaling and looking at data over time. I absolutely have Henry the Heat Monster. We all know it. Although I prefer hot weather just generally as a human. I don't do as well with it naturally. But I will tell you, Robyn in May is a very different athlete than Robyn in September. And it is so cool for me to see what paces I can pull relative to my heart rate and really start to see me heat adapting. So be careful of the stories you tell yourself when it comes to weather, because I think I just had a call a couple days ago with an athlete that's like, I don't run outside if it's below 40. And I'm like, well, why not? And they were like, well, I'm not a winter runner. I'm like, nah, you walk 2 miles to and from work every day, but you're not a winter runner? I call BS on that. I was like, we'll work on you on that one. But it's because that's the story that they told themselves, right? But in actuality, they might go out and do 2 miles and journal like, wasn't that bad? I got really warm after 5 minutes, right? And then all of a sudden that dialogue, I joke about Henry. He used to look a lot scarier. Now I'm like, oh, he's kind of fuzzy and looks like Tank. I'm not that scared of him anymore.
Is he as fast as Tank?
Yeah, faster.
A little faster. I think that's such a good one. And going a little bit further on the gear piece, this is also a great way to track mileage on your shoes. And then also what shoes you wear in certain workouts. So if you are using, if you're trying out shoes for your long runs in advance of a marathon race, or speed shoes for a 10K or something like that, it's good to be able to make notes about that, how they feel, and how much life is left in them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call. Next up is routes. Routes that you like or that are challenging or that are fresh. I mean, sometimes I'll just go off in a random direction just because, and I'm like, why have I not done this before? And then of course I'm going to forget about it, right? So writing it down and saying what you saw, maybe when you ran, where you ran, and what you found is just, it's so much more fun and fresh. And then you can be like, hey, has anybody seen the murals just north of Edge? Which is what I tend to drag people to see, because I found those on a run during COVID. And it's just, it tends to be a little bit more about discovery, which I think is a hell of a lot more fun than doing the same thing every day.
Yeah, and also in kind of on the flip, my asterisk on this one, I guess, is doing the same thing every day is comforting, if not every day, but if you need a 5-mile route, right, and you know one off the top of your head from your house, right, there is something really magical about that too. I think one of the reasons that my training in New York when I lived there was superior to my training here, I think, is that I felt really comfortable knowing that I had all of these routes in my pocket. So if I needed an easy run, I knew the flat area where I could go and just look at all the dogs. If I needed some hills, I knew what hills I needed for which ones, which workouts. I had a short steep, I had a long slow one. I had a 100-mile ride, a 50-mile ride, and knowing where you could go to, I think, can take a barrier away from your training.
I agree with that. It's like easier to get out the door.
Yeah, absolutely. I often find myself, if I'm at my house and not here is easy, 606.
Yeah, it's right there.
But at my house, I'm like, oh, I have two options. It's
north or south.
Yeah, up or down, and like I'm not thrilled about either of them. So having those routes to refer to can take a little bit of the guesswork out of your training. All right, next up is your mood, your thoughts, or your mindset. This is where we get a little woo-woo, maybe like real journaling, but it can be so impactful to write down your mindset on particular runs. A lot of the training I'm doing with my athletes right now is about mental training.
Like what are they doing?
So they're reflecting on their runs, and they're also really consciously trying to keep themselves in a more positive headspace, or more quickly identify when they're slipping into negative thought patterns and finding ways that they can pull themselves out of that.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great tool to know, like, whoa, going the wrong way, drive her back on the track.
Yeah, in so many ways, this is sort of like meditation. And so one of the things about meditation is thoughts are going to pop up in your mind, and there's no judgment. There's no good thought or bad thought. Thoughts are thoughts, and you're supposed to see them go by and let them go, right? And the biggest thing is how quickly can we get ourselves back to focusing on our breath, or focusing on whatever it is that you're focusing on in your meditation. Maybe it's a word, or your breathing is the most common one. How quickly can you get yourself back there? And so that's what I'm trying to have the athletes do, because they have different techniques. Different things work for all of them. Some of them are a little more harsh with themselves to course correct. Some of them can gently pull themselves back. And some of them it takes a much longer time. Maybe it doesn't happen in the course of the run. But if we can track that over time, I think we can see some bigger clues that can help us stay in a more positive space on race day.
Yeah, I love that. All right, last but not least, what to avoid. So all the shit that didn't work, right? When was the pool so cray-cray? Maybe the lifeguards were late. Maybe it was crowded. I just had a talk with an athlete on a run. She was saying she's not a morning person, but she remembers marathon training and missing that 6 a.m. run, saying, I get it done. And she did it done at 11 a.m. and the path was crowded and she almost got hit by a bike and she had to do, 18 miles solo, and she was like, never again. This is why we write it down.
Yep.
So that when we reflect, we're like, oh yeah, avoid that. No, just get up. Yeah, get up and go.
Yeah. Keeping track of all those things can be really helpful to keep you on course. And all of these are things that you could add. This list is not for everybody. Some of these things might not feel like they apply to you, but we encourage you to try them out because you can see some bigger clues. Also, if you feel comfortable sharing this with your coach, this is a great tool for us to be able to look at, because maybe there's things that you're saying in terms of mindset or the way that you're phrasing or framing things that we can see that isn't evident to you. So training logs, helpful all the way around. Any
No, I'm waiting on you to give me the journal.
All right, so find yourself a cute journal, start to write down your training, and let us know how it goes.
Thanks for listening to Coach Quip, original music performed by Ment. Follow us online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edge Athlete Lounge. Our podcast lives in the blog section of our website. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and you can check out the show notes for additional ways to contact us. Ready, set, onward we go.